Hello and welcome. I woke up to this super sunny but still chilly Toronto winter morning, so I thought that I would film the recently completed sketchbook tour today. And this is by far the most colorful sketchbook I have completed so far, and I'm really excited about it. The sketchbook is still Talon's art creation. I've been using these for a number of years now, and I really like them for these pocket size sketchbooks. And it's really easy to complete. There's not really a ton of overhead that you need to do. You can bring it anywhere with you. But yeah, this is kind of my go-to for these daily sketches that I do. And in terms of materials, I have used a lot of markers. They are mostly these water-based markers. When I run out of ink on these markers, I usually just toss them out. So I don't really have a lot of these to show you, but these are my reservoir for continue to sketch using this kind of brush pen style portrait sketches. To create the darkest shadows, I use these type of brush pens, and I have a whole other video to talk about it. So if you're curious about what they look like, feel free to check that video out. And I also use a very light shade from these Tombow markers. I use them so much that you can't really see any labels anymore. Let me grab one that have some labels. So these are the Tombow ABT water-based markers. They usually have this ID to tell you which marker it is, but these two I've used so much that you don't see them anymore. In fact, I think this one is almost out of ink and I have to toss it out soon. So the first page of my sketchbook is always reserved for when I started this sketchbook. In this case, it was October 4th, 2025. And I also kind of just play around with the different kind of materials that I want to use in the sketchbook. And it's mainly to test the grip of the ink against the paper, and also just whether I like it or not. And then the other thing I test for is whether it's going to bleed onto the next page. But yeah, these are some of the markers I likely used in the sketchbook. Okay, let's get started. So these were the first few styles that I did. I'm pretty sure both of these two were these mild liner, but at that time I didn't get these brush pen style, and these were just the normal dual tip highlighters that I used. And then this messy black ink was something like this. And as you can see, I kind of continued this style for a little while. Each one of these sketches were 20 minutes normally, give or take. Some of them are probably only like 10 or 15 minutes if I'm quick about it, but some of them are a little bit longer, so like 20 to 25 minutes maybe. But most of the time, I'm very good, very diligent. I watch the timer, and if it's 20 minutes, I remind myself that I need to wrap it up. I do find all of my references online. Most of them I just pinned to my Pinterest board. I'll share the link below. So if you want to follow along, you can definitely do the similar type of exercise that I do, which is aimed to improve my eye and hand coordination. So the goal is really to be able to quickly jot down and sketch out portrait references, both including like their emotions, including a little bit of their likeness. Doesn't have to be exactly, but I want to be able to quickly capture any face that I come across. And I really enjoy doing these 20-minute sketches, because although the constraint I have is really just like 20 minutes and it's a sketch, and I do like drawing portraits a lot, which is why all of these are portraits, but I don't really set up any boundary in terms of what material I want to use. So although in the beginning you can see like all these are kind of using the same medium, but later I am experimenting. And a lot of my other sketchbooks or previous sketchbook tours that you can see, in on my channel, they're not really a similar style, although they're all roughly 20-minute portrait sketch-ish. They're not using the same thing. A lot of them, I think early days, I experimented with pencil and then just like acrylic markers and whatnot. And then I just went into doing a bunch of color pencil sketches. And I wouldn't really call that searching for my art style. It's more just experimentation. When I observe like a lot of the master drawers out there, they can just pick up a pen and go onto a wall or something and start drawing characters. A lot of times it's like perfect anatomy, perfect storyline, and they do it out of their head. There's very little references. Well, most people do still use references. It's just they have looked at references and used it so much that they are so comfortable with just using it a little bit and then start drawing. Like that's kind of where I want to be eventually. I mean, I might never get to that level, who knows, but I feel like these 20-minute daily sketches are both maintainable for my personal growth and also just something that I can visibly see improvement over a period of time. And it really pushes me forward, not only from like a mental state perspective, but also from a longevity perspective. Like it's sustainable. It's not too much. 20 minutes is not a lot for my personal investment. And because of like visibly, I can see how much more comfortable I am with different mediums, capturing likeness and very different reference photos, their expression, kind of just like the uniqueness that sets them apart. And as I go over these for self-reflection, most of the time I'm highly critical. And I would say this sketchbook is by far the one where there are very few sketches that I look at it and I'm like, okay, it was just really bad. I captured it really poorly and I had a bad time drawing it. I would say this sketchbook is the first one where the only thing I really struggled with are the pens, the materials that I use, because, they run out of ink. And I will have sessions where I'm still trying to reuse the same pens. And you can visibly see that the ink is running out, as you can see here. The orange marker is pretty much completely out at this point, and the blue marker is struggling to keep up. So I'm pretty sure I am transitioning to something else now at this point. So this one, you can see a lot of experimentation. So, in the beginning, very juicy highlighters. And then I'm starting to introduce like that Tongbo shade. So you can see here, I kind of had this transition where I'm using a lot of the Tongbo. That's all the Tongbo, where it's like very little of that highlighter is shown. Oh no, the sun's going away. I hope the lighting is still good. And then here it's like completely, I had to introduce other markers to cover up because the other two that I'm using are, 不给力. So yeah, this is pure experimentation. This is also experimentation. I went back to using, I think, a really old highlighter that I have, like something like this, which is also, it's very, very light. So it's not really suitable, I would say, for these mid-tone sketches where I needed like a solid mid-tone to cover up the shadow. So then I use a lot more of the black marker that I have. And you can also see that the black marker I have, which is this marker, is also running out of ink. And then here, where I capture some of the crispiness, I think this is using this one. And then here, I completely swapped out the previous markers. I am now using a different highlighter and a different brush pen. And I think this is where, because of the material, I'm not super used to it. The tools that I have is a little bit different at this point. So I am struggling a little bit. I wouldn't say these two are my favorite. And then completely changed it yet again. I think these were using probably like a dual marker Tongbo or something. I don't remember what shade that was, but it looks like one of those. These thin sketches are using like the thinner tip on my Tongbos. These are probably using another marker, another brush pen marker. There's definitely a lot of experimentation going on here. Like this one, I don't think I capture him perfectly. It was also at this like weird angle and it's really hard to capture, but I quite like how confident and how fluid these lines were. Like, look at that. That's quite gestural-ish. And usually in these 20-minute sketch, I guess here you can still see how, you know, fluid I was with the hair. But this one in particular, it just, there's a lot of movement to this sketch. Even though I don't think I capture his likeness perfectly, I quite like, you know, just how gestural it was. Like, you know, this one doesn't have that kind of fluidity. Okay, this one I butchered. This, if there's a ugly word, I would give it to this one. I don't know what happened that day. This is just a mess. And this one also wasn't like, you know, the best sketch either. This is probably like one of the worst spreads in this whole tour. You know how I can tell whether like it was actually a good time or not? If I look at these sketches and I can vaguely remember the experience and the original reference photo, I think that's like a good session, right? But if there's a sketch and I look at it, I don't remember the original, I don't remember the time sketching it, I don't remember what reference photo I used, I think that's probably a bad time, right? Because you don't even remember what happened that day. It probably wasn't a good time. These are pretty good, I would say. This one I didn't really capture her likeness. I remember the origin reference photo. I remember putting this down on paper. And I remember recalling to myself, oh, I didn't really capture her likeness. But this one, I do think I captured her likeness, although it's not like 100% what the model looked like. But I think I did a pretty good job. Same with these. This one's better than this one. Most of the time, I don't know who the people I capture are. They're really just photos that were sent to me by Pinterest algorithm. I have this board. I have all these reference photos that I use. And a lot of times I pick them because, not because they look beautiful to me, but because I find the face really interesting to look at. Okay, that's not to say these models are not beautiful. They are. But the reason I pick them is because there's certain uniqueness and the way that the light hits their face that I find really interesting to capture. And sometimes it's just like they have this interesting facial expression that I want to capture. So, and most of the time I look for references that have contrast between light and dark. If it's too monotone, like if I can't really clearly tell where the highlight is, I don't usually use that reference photo unless it's like a really interesting perspective or really interesting, you know, facial expression. Otherwise, I tend to prefer to pick reference photos that have interesting shadows. So these are not quite as contrasting, like the mid-tone is quite heavily covered. I don't know if during this time I used different reference photos, but you can see a lot of experimentation. I kind of went through like quite a different phase in terms of picking color and markers. I probably introduced these markers because I purchased some new markers. I feel like it doesn't really matter what color they are or, you know, what marker, what brand they are. As long as it doesn't bleed to the next page, I'm pretty good. This is also one where the anatomy is really off and I didn't really capture the reference photo. I remember the reference photo, like he had a lot of light hitting on his face and creating these like, you know, and then his face is also angled this way, and it was a difficult sketch for me. and I don't think I capture him really well. I might go back and reuse that reference photo and try to create something else, because I still really like that reference photo. I just don't think this sketch is very good. And sometimes the perspective might be off, but I think it's still a good sketch. I think this is a good example. Like, this is definitely off. There's too much space here. If you like measure it, it just doesn't, it feels off to me when I look at it. But at the same time, there are things that I like about it. Like, I like, you know, the choice I have where I kind of left out the, like, you know, the center of the eye. I forgot what that's called. I left some like lightness to it, right? So she kind of has this like blank stare. And that's kind of interesting, I find. And coupled with a really pouty lip, I find this to be a really interesting sketch to look at, even though the perspective is wrong. And that's okay sometimes. Like, you're gonna create, not every single one of your studies is gonna be perfect and exactly what you expect. Sometimes when you first started, you had like a different vision. And then when you completed it, it's not quite there. And that's kind of why I always sketch with like a lighter shade. You can clearly see in this one, right? I used this gray shade. That's what I did for the initial sketch. And obviously it's not right. So later on, when I use other colors on top of it, I purposely, you know, use different lines, and that's fine. You can see a little bit of that too here. So this girl's face, same problem. I think the midsection is a little bit too up. Like, this whole section, if this is Photoshop or Procreate, you know, or one of the digital apps that you can use, I will move this slightly down a little bit to make her face look better. But, you know, this is a pen sketch and you move on from your mistakes. Not every sketch is gonna turn out to be, you know, perfect, and you had to learn to accept it and move on. And didn't turn out the way you like it, well, flip the page. Let's, you know, you're gonna have a better, clear, and blank canvas the next page flipped over. So not a big deal. I wish I would have had this one a little bit more fluid. I remember in this one, like, her hair was just messy and everywhere. Capture that as I wanted. This is another one where the face is really angled really awkwardly, and there's some warping of perspective on her face because the camera is really close to her face. But I feel like I did like a good-ish job this time around compared to some of the previous sketches where the perspective is really different. And here I started drawing some kids, and then some older people. I started introducing some accessories, which I don't usually do. I don't usually like to sketch all accessories. I quite like this sketch. And for this one, I don't know why I added that. I remember I added that, and then immediately I thought to myself, oh, why did I do that? Now it looks like he has makeup on. Because we're doing pen sketches, once you put it down, especially the darkest shade, there's no escaping. You put it down and that's it. I added it here again. Most of the time I add it because there is something there that's off that shape, but sometimes I do add in certain shapes for shadows that are a little bit more interesting to look at. I don't always do that, but sometimes I do. Like, for example, here, right? I mean, there's no way that the shadow on her face looks exactly like that, but I thought it would be interesting making kind of like a shape like that. Same with here. He definitely didn't have like these shapes, right, on his face, but like I decided to add certain shapes like that to depict the shadow. And I can't remember if I started doing that just recently. I think I might have. I think previously it's, well, like I kind of did that here, but it's more like sketch lines. So I think I did only like starting to really create like different shapes instead of sketch lines. So, yeah, you can see that previously I don't usually create shapes, and instead it looks more like little light strokes. And it's only recently that I started to do that I create a interesting shape. Yeah, so this is another example where I'm creating a different shape for the shadow. But I don't like stick to it or anything. Like here, it's a little bit different. She looks like kind of weird to me, so it's definitely off. This doesn't look right. This is not right either. And this one's not good. This one's not right, but this is great. Really simple and really put together. I really like that one. I don't like this one. This one's a little bit better. This is a nice spread. I like both of these too. This is not bad also. I feel like I probably run out of time or something. Like, I feel like it's missing some black lines here. It feels really off. This line would have been better if it's elongated. The neck feels a little bit off to me. It's a very high energy, interesting kit. I remember this vividly. And yeah, I also decided to kind of switch markers at this point. Probably ran out of color. Yeah, I probably ran out of color on that blue marker, and now I'm using something else. And I have like people asking me in comments, I remember, like, oh, why don't you use this color? Why don't you use that color? I don't like to pick a lot of colors because 20 minutes isn't that long to experiment with. So like the brain's doing a bunch of things already. If you give it too many choices, it's gonna mess up. So usually I just pick 1 to 2 shade for the mid-tone. Sometimes I don't even have transition, like depending on the model that I'm trying to capture. But I would say most of the time I kind of just stick to 1 to 2. And unless I'm experimenting. And that's kind of the mid-tone or like the initial sketch that I use to create these sketches. And I do like to mix a cool tone and a warm tone, as you can see. Well, you know, these are created with like this purple and blue as the mid-tone, and then a warm skin color from the Tombow brush pen that I use as the warm tone, right? And obviously you need the darkest marker for shadow and whatnot. So that's kind of like the run up, the different markers that I deem I need for these 20-minute portrait sketches. And it honestly doesn't matter what color you use. I know a lot of people dwell over that fact, but you can use whatever you want. I think any cool tone could be used for like a shadow, and any warm tone you can use as like the mid-tone transition. Play around with it. You could use a deeper warm tone for the shadow as well. It just depends on the energy you want to give to your portrait studies. But most of the time, okay, in reality, if you look at the shadow, it's usually a cool tone. It's quite rare that you would, especially on people's faces, that you would get like a warm, deep, dark shade. Unless there's some kind of, I don't know, reflection going on, like if you're wearing a red sweater and then you can get the light to bounce off and create interesting shadows. But most of the time, okay, like 90% of the time, it's not like that. And you can clearly tell I'm running out of ink again in these sketches, so I need to start experimenting again. Yeah, like I really struggled with her hair because that black marker that I was using is just like dead. And then I started using something else. So this is where I started using the Tongbo as the black marker. And I'm struggling because the Tongbo is a much fatter brush tip and it's harder to capture details using this fat tip. So I'm struggling here. I decided to use like the other lighter brush tip pen to create an outer layer so that I don't need to rely on the Tongbo to capture all of the lines, because I really do feel like, for example, that this is, I mean, he's bald, I think, and the light hits it like this way. So it's really light up there. And if I introduce the Tongbo like as a fat line here, I don't know if it's gonna work for this sketch. So I kind of like how because the tool I'm using is not that great, and B, so like it's not that great as in it's really hard for me to create like a really thin line, and you know, B, I have other markers to use and the reference photo looks like that, so I kind of just make the deliberate decision from here point on to just use it very lightly, like don't overuse it because it's so thick. And you can see I kind of stopped overlining a lot of these regions. This one I didn't, but there's still like some parts of it where I'm just leaving as blank, because it truly is very difficult to create a very thin line using that Tongbo brush pen tip. There's something about overlaying that blue with that purple that creates almost like a galaxy effect. And I quite like it. It looks really colorful, doesn't it? Even though it's just like this purple and blue color. And we're almost at the end. So these are some kits that I drew. And that's it. This is the last page. And I decided to experiment on the last page. And look what I did. I used a warm tone as the shadow. And really used the black marker lightly. Too lightly, I would say. But this is the last spread. And I do like how it turned out. I think I captured the kits quite well. There's some transfer of ink. Whoopsies. Probably laid it over when it's not fully dried yet, but so I completed the sketchbook on March 10th, 2026. Thanks for watching.